Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Today's author is Diane McKinney-Whetstone. She's the author of the critically acclaimed novels Tumbling, Tempest Rising, Blues Dancing, Leaving Cecil Street, and Trading Dreams at Midnight. Diane McKinney-Whetstone is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Black Caucus of the American Library Association's Literary Award for Fiction, which she won twice. She lives in Philadelphia with her husband. Diane McKinney-Whetstone.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you all for coming out on this challenging weather night, but you know, all weather is good, so we won't complain about the rain, because there are parts of the country that do not get enough. It's wonderful to be here, and I will read a little bit from Lazaretto, my latest novel, and if you all have any questions, I'd love to answer questions. This novel is set in Philadelphia on a quarantine station, the Lazaretto of the title, and it is just south of the Philadelphia airport. The actual structure is still there. I never knew it existed when I started working on the book. I was actually going to set the book in a much in an earlier time period, and my husband, who helps me with the research, started sending me all this information about. I was going to write about the yellow fever epidemic in the late 1790s, and he started sending me all this information, and it was too much. And I said, enough, too much to absorb. Except I kept seeing this word Lazaretto. I said, what is the Lazaretto? And discovered that during its heyday, it actually processed more immigrants than were processed at Ellis Island. Everybody knows about Ellis Island. I did not know, as a native Philadelphian, that the Lazaretto existed, or the significant history that it had in the formation of our country. It was actually instituted to protect the city from another yellow fever outbreak similar to the one that had decimated Philadelphia in 1796, and everyone left. I mean, all the moneyed people left. It was, during that time, Philadelphia was capital to both the state and the U.S. government. They fled. And another outbreak like that could have really decimated the city and rendered it, you know, a squalor-filled town of smoldering rags. So to protect against that, the Board of Health was formed. They instituted the Lazaretto. And so part of the novel takes place on the Lazaretto. Originally, the whole novel took place on the Lazaretto, but the characters have backstories that I imagined. And so half of it takes place actually in Philadelphia. And that was very exciting for me to write about Philadelphia. All of my novels are set in Philly, but none quite that historically. So I will read just a couple of pages from the very beginning of the novel. And so we'll need no other setup except to say a couple of pages from the beginning of the novel. The dimly lit room smelled of sage and mint and boiled cotton. A lone candle high on a whitewashed mantel threw off just enough light to illuminate a space on the wall above it where a picture of Abraham Lincoln hung. The sight of him with his top hat and wry smile seemed to calm Meda as she pushed and moaned, her legs spread wide apart. 14-year-old Sylvia gently slid her hands between Meda's legs into what felt to Sylvia like the center of a volcano. How many fingers can you insert? Asked Dr. Miss, the midwife, directing Sylvia. My entire hand, Sylvia said, as a low-pitched cry of pain rumbled out of Meda, and Sylvia quickly pulled her hand back. Your hand is not the cause of her discomfort this moment, Dr. Miss said. This is her first, and there is no history to draw on with the first to help them when they push. Yes, ma'am, Sylvia said. This was also Sylvia's first. She'd worked here going on a year as assistant to Dr. Miss, and right now her duties had taken a monumental leap. She and Dr. Miss had exchanged places, and instead of dabbing Meda's forehead and speaking encouraging words in a soothing voice, and otherwise doing what Dr. Miss requested, Sylvia now sat on Dr. Miss's stool at the foot of the cot, taking a lead in delivering a baby. Now tell me what you see. Sylvia looked at the waning flame of the candle that was struggling to stay alive. I believe I need more light, she said as she got up to retrieve the candle. Did I say you need more light? Dr. Miss snapped, as if to remind Sylvia who was who. Your hand, no ma'am, you did not. Your hand should be your light. Yes ma'am, but you generally employ more light at this juncture. I am just trying to determine if there is a reason. I know how to do this in the absence of light, and you must as well, because another occasion may require it. Leave the candle and return to the stool. Yes, ma'am, Sylvia said, then held her tongue as she walked back across the pine floor that had been painted white, the way everything in this room was white, from the cot to the stool, to the hearth, to the frame that held the president's likeness. Sylvia reasoned that the preponderance of white in this room was Dr. Miss's attempt at coating a swath of purity over the various situations that found their way here. Though Dr. Miss prided herself on delivering the babies of literate, well-to-do black parents attracted to her because her father had been a respected intellectual, a Freemason, and a barber who dispensed fiery diatribes against slavery right along with the perfect cut and shave, there was an underbelly to her practice that she kept hidden from her respectable clientele, where she expertly removed formations 8 to 12 weeks along before a woman started to show. Troubled formations, Dr. Miss called them, when a woman was not legally betrothed or too young or too old, too fragile, or, as in the case of Meda, escorted here under cover of night by a wealthy white man in a 2-horse carriage. Dr. Miss had become well known in the whispered circles of rich white men as a viable medical solution to the consequences of their indiscretions. Meda was supposed to have been such a case. But once Meda was out of her cape, even Sylvia could see that though this young woman was small and carried small, the formation she carried had already dropped, was already in a prone position, and troubled or not, was a full-term formation ready to be born. The candle's light was down to a wisp as Sylvia returned to her place on the stool. She was about to insert her hand again and see what she could see. But then Meda let out a growl of a sound, followed by a hard grunt that expanded like a cyclone, growing longer, wider, and Sylvia gasped because suddenly she could almost see the head. Crowning, Dr. Miss called, standing over Sylvia now. I believe so. Yes, cup your hands and take care. We'll be slippery. Sylvia did, surprised that her hands were not shaking because all of her insides were, as she watched the head push out and actually turn itself around as the shoulders squeezed through. Was all that Sylvia could manage to say, because with all the other births she had been tending to the mother at the other end of the cot, she'd never before witnessed this instant. And then stillness, everywhere in the room it seemed, except for the silence that replicated itself in pulses of non-sound. And already her hands were holding the baby, and the baby's cries pushed through the silence. And Sylvia was both laughing and crying, and now the candle flame had died completely, and between the darkened air and her own tears, she could barely see enough to even determine whether the baby was a girl or a boy. She tried to piece through the darkness, but before she could, Dr. Miss covered the baby with a white square of a blanket and snipped the cord. Sylvia lifted the baby to her then. She moved her hand under the blanket to rub its back. Its skin was warm and slick. The tiny curls of its breath tickled her neck. The pat-pat of its heartbeat thrilled her. And then a cold space of air as Dr. Miss took the baby from her arms, and Sylvia felt the sudden absence of its warmth. Then her eyes cleared, and she focused on a minuscule hand that was the palest pink with just a hint of yellow, like the first light of dawn reaching through the black air. It seemed to be reaching for Meda's voice as Meda called out, "My baby, give him to me. Please, let me have my child." Generally at this point, Dr. Miss would inspect the baby, then place it on the mother's chest. She did not this time. "Warm her, please. She's getting chills. Then deliver the afterbirth," she said to Sylvia. "Rub her stomach in circles to help it along. Then pour a cup of calming brew and get her to sip." "Yes, ma'am," Sylvia said, looking through the air to try to find Dr. Miss's face. Dr. Miss was tall and thin and dark, made even taller and darker by a white cloth wrapped around her head, piled high like a queen's crown, the rest of her essentially lost in this black-aired room. Sylvia often thought that with all of the medicinal plants growing around here and the concoctions brewing, if Dr. Miss had not been such a skilled midwife, she could have certainly succeeded as a witch. She thought that now, as Dr. Miss seemed to turn a deaf ear to Meda, who was trying to sit up, her calls for her baby having grown louder, more insistent. The baby's cries were full throttle now, too. It was as if the baby and Meda were engaged in a charged call and response, the space between them widening. as Dr. Miss walked away with the baby, her long white dress flouncing as she moved through the door, leaving Sylvia to contain Meda, who was trying to get up from the cot to go after them. Sylvia delivered the afterbirth and sedated Meda per Dr. Miss's instructions. Then she went into the parlor, where Dr. Miss was in hushed conversation with the man who escorted Meda there, Tom Benny, a powerful Philadelphia attorney, though he seemed anything but at the moment. As Dr. Miss motioned Sylvia in and he turned and glanced at her, he seemed as if he'd been winnowed down by shame and remorse. His skin white and his eyes red, his manner delicate as he listened to Dr. Miss's report. She arrived months too late for the other procedure, Dr. Miss said. I am sorry that she was so good at keeping her cloak. She is a small woman after all. He looked down, away from Dr. Miss, as if he were a chastened schoolboy being reprimanded by the headmaster. He even stammered over his words as he asked Dr. Miss if she was certain that there had been no other option. If there had been, I assure you, we would have exercised it. She snapped the ends of her words. And the baby was born alive, he asked, as if he hoped that by phrasing the question directly, he might hear a different response. I have already said yes, born alive, full term. The edge to Dr. Miss's tone increased the more she spoke. He pulled out a pocket watch, a gold watch, decorated with bridges, the likes of which Sylvia had never seen. I am just not prepared for such a result at this time, he said, talking more to the watch than to Dr. Miss. Neither were we, but we are accustomed to adjusting to unexpected results. So you have had this situation prior? We have, and have handled it with discretion. And if you handle this likewise, what will be its disposition? We think it best that the fewer details you have, the better for all concerned. And how is she, he asked. Meda or the baby? Because the baby is actually her, Meda, he said, his hushed voice straining with agitation now. I assure you that Meda will pull through expertly in body, though the heart is slower to recover. He swallowed hard and placed his hands on the edges of Dr. Miss's ornate oak desk as if to steady himself, as if to keep himself from collapsing into tears, and Sylvia balled her fist to steady herself too, to resist the wave of compassion for the man trying to bowl her over. She disliked about herself the way she could be affected by a thin veil of good in a person who was otherwise despicable. Wished right now that she was blind to this man's complexities. He squared his shoulders then, suddenly remembered his stature. On second thought, I will see to its disposition myself. Ready it, please. My carriage is waiting along the side of this structure. Deliver it to me there. Sir, Dr. Miss said, as if she'd not heard him. It occurs to me that I have several options. But, sir, I already have a suitable resolution in mind. Dr. Miss's sharp tone was replaced with a softer, pleading one. A young Negro couple of the highest caliber. I said I have another option. Now it was he snapping the ends of his words, and Dr. Miss was the one looking away, looking down as she breathed deeply several times, and the only thing in the room that seemed to move was her chest, rising and falling. As you wish, she said, and we should tell Meda what, sir? Tell her her baby girl died, he said, already out of the parlor. Dr. Miss sank in her chair, her face ashen, as if all the blood had left her. Her head wrap had begun to unravel and hung along the side of her face. She spoke more to the thick drapery swagged around the parlor's doorway than to Sylvia. The woman I had in mind would have been the perfect mother. I've been treating her barren womb. Now, who knows what he will do? Sylvia's heart was beating double time as she swallowed the urge to cry. Was it a girl, ma'am? She asked in a whisper. Did you not deliver it? Dr. Miss's voice was a mix of agitation and reprimand. Sylvia clasped and unclasped her hands. The candle died, ma'am. It was dark, and then you covered it. The baby. You covered the baby, and I did not see. Let that be a lesson to you, Sylvia. I told you that your hand should be your eyes. Yes, ma'am. And then Sylvia could no longer hold it in, and she started to cry. You do not think he means the baby harm, do you? She said in a cracked voice. I do not know what he will do. He does not even know what he will do. He is not in his right mind. The shock of a live birth has left him incapable of clear thought. Well, we can tell him that the baby died, Sylvia said, her voice screeching as she tried to contain herself. We can take the lie that he is prepared to tell Miss Meda and turn it right back on him. Then you can give the baby to the woman as you have planned. That is preposterous, Sylvia. But, ma'am, you said he is incapable of clear thought. We should think for him, then, for the sake of the baby. And what if he has to see the course? That is his child. But is the baby not also Miss Meda's? Is Miss Meda his property in Philadelphia in 1865? Dr. Miss stood and rewound her head wrap back up high. I will cover the baby in a balm that will protect her against evil intentions. And you, Sylvia, must accept that most Negroes do not live the prosperous life that your parents are able to give you. It is best for Meda that she believes her baby died. She will grieve, she will recover, she will be better than most in her situation. It is my understanding that the Bennets live and help enjoy excellent accommodations. And yet, she has come to us, carrying his... Sylvia stopped herself then. She had gone too far. She knew by the way Dr. Miss squared her shoulders and focused her eyes like spears trained on Sylvia. Forgive me, ma'am, Sylvia said, as she looked down at the planked hearts of pine floor. It's just that the baby was my first. She swallowed hard to hold herself from crying again. Shall I ready the baby to deliver to his carriage? I will do it, Dr. Miss said, and you best mind your mouth, Sylvia, or find a different training ground for your nursing aspirations. Yes, ma'am, Sylvia said. But Dr. Miss had already left the parlor. Sylvia sank into the chair where Tom Benning had just been. She was remembering the feel of the baby's head, finding the crook of her neck and nestling there. A girl, she whispered to herself. It was a girl. It was my first. And I will stop there.
So good.
Thank you. So, if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer any questions you have. Any comments?
According to your book, I haven't read it.
Excuse me?
This one.
Uh-huh.
In the flap, it talked about these people living in this
Quarantine station? Yes.
What was the disease for the quarantine?
Well, this is actually the live-in staff. They live at the Lazaretto during high quarantine season, which then was between June and September. And so all ships coming into the port of Philadelphia had to stop first at the Lazaretto and be inspected. And if people appeared sick, they were taken off and held at the Lazaretto until they recovered or died. And cargo was inspected. If cargo was suspect, it was burned. And so that was the system in place by the Board of Health. In my fictional world of the novel, the staff two of the staff people want to get married. And they ask the quarantine master if they can get married on the Lazaretto and invite some of their friends in. And the quarantine master agrees. These are two of the black live-in staff. And he had done a similar thing for a white couple the year before. And he's from a long line of abolitionists, so he tried to do what he could for equality. And he allows that. But then they send word to Philadelphia, and it's not like 4 people. It's like 20 people want to come for the wedding. And so he gives the white staff leave for the weekend, and so that the black staff can just enjoy themselves unencumbered, and all of the people come in on the boat for this wedding, and things happen. And as a result of things happening, the people there are in fact quarantined. So the staff and also the people who travel. This happens midway in the book, though, because first there's the backstory of all the characters, and then they finally reach the Lazaretto about halfway through the book. And then the secrets unfold, and I won't tell you, I'll just tell you that the Lazaretto comes from there were Lazarettos all over Europe in middle century, and it means patron saint of lepers. But biblically, Lazarus was also raised from the dead by Jesus. So the name Lazaretto has significance to me as I was writing the book. And on the Lazaretto, like secrets rise up, like dead men rising, is how I thought about it as I was working on the book. So yes, that's how they get to the Lazaretto, and the Lazaretto was quarantined.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Yes.
Where did you say it was located?
Right, like very close. It's in Tennicum Township.
Okay.
It's very close to where the Philadelphia Airport is, just a little southwest of the Philadelphia
Is it still
Airport.
there?
It's still there. The actual building is still there.
Oh.
I mean, I went there many times just to see the actual structure. And it has been actually a ballroom or next to it where weddings have taken place. And I thought, that's interesting because in my imagination, weddings did in fact take place there. It's also been a seaplane. It's now being a foot of front to preserve it so that it will be historically certified. It may be a firehouse at some point. So it's been through many iterations, but the actual structure is still there.
Because of your book, all this preservation is being taken.
No, actually, that's been going on. That's been going on for a while. And a history professor at Penn, David Barnes, has done a lot of research there and a lot of work. And I think he's also involved with trying to keep it, to preserve the actual structure. I've never been inside. I have seen pictures of the inside. So it was just, I just let my imagination run wild with what it was like.
So it's
there's
not
been a-
open to the public?
Not
Not at all.
currently, no. I mean, he's gone there and done excavations and whatnot. I mean, the facility is there. You can ride there and walk around it. The actual hospital is still there. Yes. Yes.
Which was more difficult, the fictional character development or the historical?
The historical. The historical was so much more
That's
difficult.
funny.
I love to imagine how things may have been. I mean, that is what I love to do. And I find that the fictional part of it, when I work on that, I discover things. I mean, certain truths I really discover. And I suppose, historians would cringe. But I think that sometimes the fictional worlds can be more true, can be more emotionally honest. And that the facts sometimes will get in the way of, for me, for rendering the emotional honesty that the novel has to have. So the actual research, I mean, unfortunately, my husband was real helpful with the actual digging for information. But the actual research was a lot more difficult for me. I just love to imagine. I mean, there were parts, I had situated a scene in John Wanamaker, and because I love John Wanamaker, and I spent a lot of time on the scene, and then I discovered that John Wanamaker, I mean, it was just a stall, but it would not have been this like dry goods store that I needed for it to be. So I had to move it further down Market Street and make it Strawbridge's, because at that point Strawbridge's was much more of a dry goods store and had a variety of things. That was so difficult because I had John Wanamaker in my head.
Yeah.
So that I have to alter what I'm seeing because of these facts that I've discovered. Now, sometimes the facts are exciting. I mean, I realized that when Abraham Lincoln came to the Independence Hall and his body embalmed lying in state, that the mayor of Philadelphia set aside a time just for the very rich, the very privileged, to view the president's body. And there was a near riot outside where the masses wanted to get in as well. And people's clothes were torn and all of that. And that was just fascinating. So I used that. I mean, there's a chapter early on where Meda is trying to get in because Abraham Lincoln just has significance for her. And she wiles her way in to actually view his body. So there are times when the facts can just be exciting and can then generate much more the imaginative process that I need for the novel. But the research is so difficult. That is my least favorite part of the process. Yes.
You were saying that all your other books are set in Philadelphia, but do all the other books have like as much historical content to them, or some of those just more in current day?
Some are more contemporary. Tumbling, the first novel, actually has quite a bit of, it was set in 40s and 50s, Philadelphia, South Philadelphia. And actually when I started writing, I realized I was writing about my mother's neighborhood, and I'd grown up with her stories about Philadelphia during that time period. And so I was able to use like actual detail, and my father was living during much of the writing of that book, and I could talk to him, and he could tell me things as well. So that is also historical, but I had a lot of help. I mean, just from people who could tell me what was on a corner. I mean, how much a washing machine or refrigerator, how much a refrigerator cost, and the type of music that was there, and how people dressed. I mean, I had people who could actually tell me that, and could render details that I otherwise would not know. So that one is fairly historical. And then I was able to use like Philadelphia Inquirer and newspapers, old magazines, and just immerse myself in the time period, so that novel was also fairly historical. The others are, I could draw on my own memory. I mean, one goes back and forth between the 70s and 90s, takes place partially on Penn's campus, and that, of course, I could draw on my memory. But then there are still times when I have to make sure if I'm talking about a singer or a song, someone saw a live performance, making sure that that person was still alive during the dates of the novel. So I still have to research, but it's more to confirm things that I've already included in the novel. So this one just took a lot more research. Any other questions?
Since tumbling is 20 years old, what's a goal? Can you tell us about how you got sort of discovered? Can you tell us that story, or do you not like to repeat it?
No. I cannot say. You know, someone had cautioned me when I was working on tumbling. Enjoy the process, because you'll never do a first novel again, and that is so true. And I worked on tumbling between 5 and 7 every morning, because that's the only time of day that I owned that I didn't have to negotiate. I mean, my children were like middle school age. I was otherwise very busy working for the federal government, a 9-to-5 job, and I was the family's alarm clock. So the only time of day I didn't have to negotiate with family or community or church or anything else I was involved in, career, was this very early morning time of 5 to 7. And that's when I started getting up, and that's when I started writing, and this book fell onto the pages beyond my wildest dreams. And after a year, I had a first draft. I joined a writing group, and a woman in the writing group had known an agent in New York and suggested I send her some pages, and I did. And the agent wrote back and said that she loved it. She wanted to see the entire novel, though. So I worked on it some more. In the meantime, I got a grant from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts that allowed me to take maybe a month off. But I figured since I'm asking for leave, I'm going to take 3 months off. And my husband was getting really nervous because he thought I was having a breakdown. And it's like, 3 months? I might as well go for it. And I did. And during those 3 months, I fine-tuned the novel. My children went to sleepaway summer camp for a month, and I had like this exclusive time. I fine-tuned the novel. I sent it back to the agent, the complete novel, and she loved it. And within a week of sending her the novel, I had like a major publishing deal. And I was prepared for the litany of rejections that happens, certainly with first-time novels. I was set up for that, and it would have been, I won't say it would have been okay, but it would have been expected. I was prepared to plaster my walls, as I heard writers had done with the rejection letters. That didn't happen in this case, and it was amazing, this immediate reaction to the book, and the book went on to become a bestseller, and it was just very, very well reviewed. And so that was my first novel, and I'd known all my life that I wanted to write fiction. And at the point when I started the novel, I was approaching a significant birthday, and it was the evaluation of your life kind of thing, and looking at the kinds of things that I'd always wanted to do, that if I did not try would be a major regret. And I realized that writing fiction, if I did not try, would be a major regret. And that's when I just had to, I still tried to put it off. I'm too busy. It's not a good time. I don't have time, except that I couldn't put it off, and I can only describe it as this little voice, but it just grew, and it was like an internal thunder. And I could no longer ignore it, and just realized I had to designate a time. And so it was very early in the morning, and that became my magic time. There's something about the transition between night and day, you know, the sun coming up, and I just felt like things happened that would not happen later on in the day, certainly not by the time I got to work. And even though I would sit in meetings and think about the characters and make a note to myself if something occurred to me. But so that became, and the novel though quickly expanded. Well, the process expanded, so it didn't want to stay contained in those 2 hours. I'd sometimes get up at 4:30. I'd call in, I'm sick. My children were often late for school because I was the household alarm clock. My husband was late, and if I didn't get folks up, they didn't get up. So, or use that as an excuse. So that part of the process became very messy. And I realized now it was necessary for it to be messy for me to then pull the novel together. So that's how it happened. And
Good
yeah.
that you did that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And that's what I tell people who want to write. The most important thing you can do is really have a time that you own and show up. Must show up. Show up. Whatever that time is. You know, it can be late at night. It can be early in the morning. I found that it is, particularly when I was teaching, would tell my students it should be a time when you have a level of disassociation from the literal world. And so that for me was very early, still a little groggy, but still just with a clarity of thought and just access to parts of my imagination that are much more elusive later on in the day. So it's important, I think, for writers to know their time, to discover their time, and then show up. Because it does no good to know it and not be sitting there ready for whatever to happen to happen.
So you still do that?
I still get up. I mean, when I'm really working on, I do. I still get up very early when I'm intensively on a project, just because that's just, things happen for me. And it doesn't mean that I don't write later in the day when I have to, because often I have to, but just the early morning time is my time. Yes. Yeah.
Do you do any journaling as part of your process?
I don't really journal that much. I mean, I'll do free writing, where I'll just give myself a time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and just write whatever I want to write without worrying about it making sense, or without worrying about grammar or logic or spelling or anything. Just write. And so I will do a fair amount of that, particularly when I'm stuck. And sometimes that will help me push through this wall that has suddenly appeared and break through to the other side and discover things.
So what you working on next?
I'm actually, as this was very historical and, has some, heft to it, I suppose. The subject matter is fairly serious, even though there are funny moments in the book to me. But what I'm working on now actually feels a lot lighter. And it doesn't mean it will stay lighter, because I follow the characters. I never know where the story will take me. But right now it is, it's set on a retirement village. And I guess the subtitle could be Seniors Behaving Badly.
Yes.
I'll say that. And that's all I'll say. Except that I'm starting to go back into their past, and so this will also have some little gravitas as well.
That sounds great.
Yes.
What are you currently reading?
What am I reading? I started. I've just finished Toni Morrison's God Help the Child that I loved. I love Toni Morrison. She is one of my favorites, and I just look to her for examples of possibilities, what one can do with the language. What she does with the language. So particularly when I'm stuck, I will just pick up something even that I've already read and read that. I have on the Book of Harlan by Bernice McFadden that I've not opened yet, but that is on my list. And All the Light They Cannot See. Has anybody read that? Did you read it?
It's on my pile.
Okay, that is also on my pile. And Goldfinch. Did anybody read that? Donna Tartt. Did you like that?
Yes.
It's really, and
It's a project.
Yeah.
It is, and I'm through the part with the. I don't want to spoil, but the bomb. It is just so, that scene is so incredibly written, and after I read that scene, it's like, oh my goodness, it was just just blew me away. So I'm on that too. I mean, we'll start a lot of books simultaneously, and then the ones that really hold me, I'll just go on through.
Do you think that both books deserve the Pulitzer Prize? The two that you just mentioned, Finch and.
Yeah, I suppose, but it is. I don't know the criteria at all, so I'm sometimes surprised. I mean, when McBride won for Good Lord Bird, Good Lord Bird, right?
Yes.
Good Lord.
The Good Lord Bird.
Yes, that's an incredible, and I just thought that was so. It's an incredible book, incredibly written, and the voice it's a voice that I'd not heard before in fiction. It was just so well rendered. I mean, I thought that was absolutely worthy. So, I mean, I don't know. I suppose it depends on the book and the all the other books that are also up that year.
Mm-hmm.
There are absolutely.
You listen to that, The Good Lord Bird on audio tape, unabridged audio tape, like when we drove to Pittsburgh. She couldn't wait to drive back to keep hearing it.
Really?
It was
Yes.
so good.
Yes.
I don't remember who read, but it was the character was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. He's an incredible writer. Yes.
Well, how about as a child, like you said you always wanted to write fiction, was there an author or some book that you read as a child that sparked that, or what might have been?
Good question. I don't know. I can remember my sisters and I having reading contests where we would see who could read a book the fastest, and then you had to actually say what the book was about. I mean, this is when there were like 3 TV stations, so, and if you weren't outside, particularly on a weekend, this is even before UHF, where you could get like the additional channels. That's all you could do, and we would race reading books, and then you had to actually say what the book was about to prove that so you couldn't just say I finished, to prove what it was about. So I mean, it was during that time when we read like Heidi, Tom Sawyer. I mean, we read classics, I suppose, and I don't know. I mean, I think perhaps on an unconscious level, I was devouring the books, and something was happening. I don't know consciously if I can say that there was one book that I read that said, this is it, and I want to do this. I don't know that was necessarily the case.
Did you ever want to write a children's book or a young adult book?
Not really. I mean, I didn't.
Well, your
Good
characters
question.
are pretty complex.
The characters are pretty complex, and some. I mean, I've heard of middle schoolers who've read Tumbling, and so that I mean, I think the way the material is handled in Tumbling, that a sophisticated middle schooler can certainly handle it. Some of the other books, I would say not. So I've not really considered young adult or children's books. I've not really considered that. I was gonna say I have a 7-month-old granddaughter, so I may change my mind about the children's books as I read to her and make up stories. Other questions?
I'm just curious because I grew up in Northeast Philly. I was just wondering where you went to school, or like grade school or high school, or.
Oh yeah, I grew up in West Philly.
Okay.
And I went to Hamilton Elementary School, and in fact, I did earlier in the month. I did a reading at Philadelphia Free Library, and this man stood up and said, "I have fond memories of you from Hamilton Elementary School," and I said, Mr. Finkelstein, it was my elementary school principal there. I couldn't believe it. He was actually there. So I went to Hamilton Elementary School, Sayre Junior High, West Philly High, and then I went to University of Penn. I did live on campus at Penn. My husband teases me that because after we married, we lived in West Philly for a while before we moved out of the city for a little bit. But he teased me that I had gone from birth to like 30 and never gone more than 4 miles. I mean, never gone more than 2 miles, which I suppose was kind of true. And, you know, I consider myself like really open-minded and cosmopolitan and all that. But when he would say that, I'd say, oh, that's true. But that was my, went to Philadelphia Public Schools. Yes. You went to Northeast High, I guess?
Well, Catholic school.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Okay. Yes.
So where's your new book set?
It's set a little bit out of the city, except that the people are all from Philadelphia. So it will certainly, as I get into their backstories, it will be Philadelphia neighborhoods. But it's set on this 55 plus active living retirement community, and just a little bit out of the city. I haven't like actually named the suburb yet, or maybe exurb even, where it's located, but just could be Westchester, Chadsford, somewhere. It could be somewhere like that. Yes, because it needs to be for the story. It needs to be a little drive from the actual city.
And when is that one due?
Well, I'm working on it now, and I haven't actually even turned the proposal into my agent, because I'll turn the proposal into her, and she may want to see. I don't know if she'll want to see the whole novel, or if I give her a good 150 pages, if that will be enough. But I'll turn it into her, and then she'll shop it around to publishers and see if what happens. I'm hopeful though. I mean, it just feels light, and it feels like the crowd, the boomers are like a huge population, and so I think there's a built-in audience for it. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Did you bring this baby?
This is my grand. Yes.
It was funny that as you were reading that.
Yes. Well, when I read at the library and it streamed online, so my daughter-in-law could listen, because they had to leave. When I was reading the part about the birth, she started crying, and they had to like leave, and I was like, no, I almost wanted to like call her by my nickname and say, don't go, but they my son and daughter-in-law took her out, and then after she left, I said, well, I guess the material was a bit rough for her. So. But yes. So this, she laughed. I watched her as I was reading, and she was back there on her dad's shoulder laughing. So yes.